What is radical kindness, and what can someone sort of expect when they buy and read this book?
So radical kindness is looking at the world from the root of kindness, literally talking about seeing with your heart. And there's a ton of science behind the idea that when we literally pivot with the way in which we look at the world and how we care about ourselves, and then how we treat others, even others that are difficult to be dealing with, and the way in which we treat the world, what we see is a kindness contagion. We see the science behind it. We see cardiac health being lowered. We see stress being lowered, of course. And so it just made sense to put it all in a book to remind us today, with everything that's going on and us being bombarded, how we can literally change the world with kindness.
And sort of how did that inspiration to write a book about kindness, where did that come from?
So I have always been inspired by Fred Rogers. He's a huge mentor for me from afar. And so I actually went into children's media because of him. And this idea that someone could literally talk to you in a calming voice, that they can literally see you for who you are as much as you can through media, but then also, of course, meeting him in person and realizing the vision that he has behind everything that he does. Anyway, that inspired me to do, I think I have 8 shows that I've done for kids, and all of the shows have a foundation of kindness, and yet all of that science and all of that curriculum has never been out there before for adults, so that we can literally see that this isn't frou-frou stuff. This is more than just being nice. This is literally something that can cause a revolution in the way in which the world comes together, and the way in which that we can change the world.
So I guess from a person who reviews phones, I feel like that's something that we've been hearing a lot more about in terms of general being nice to each other, using our phones through texting, when we're messaging people on social media, particularly there's a lot of anxiety going around, and then there's internet trolls and just all this stuff that's happening in the world because of people having access to this technology and communicating differently through a barrier that's something like a phone. How do you think you can have radical kindness when people are so detached from, sitting down and having a conversation with someone, whereas when they can sort of shield themselves with this online persona? Yeah,
exactly. That's such a great question. I mean, the first thing that we talk about is looking up from our phones, right? Mm-hmm. The idea that there's bonding and this communication, we're lacking that, right? That level of relationship that we need to have, but we need to put our phones in the middle of the table when we're having dinner conversation, right? And that what we're doing right here and right now is as important, if not more important. And that bonding and that community is something that, sure, we can have it through technology, but there's nothing like that attentive listening and that bonding from a community in person. And then, of course, this is the idea of, it might take a little longer to prevent bullying or to prevent those trolls, but when we look at the world in this way and do these small changes, what we'll notice is that empathetic communication, that way of looking at something before you're going to write something negative about somebody else, thinking about how it's going to affect you. And I think that level of empathy and compassion is something that we're missing because we're hiding behind those screens so much. Mm-hmm. And again, how can we dig through that? And I think the importance of this one-on-one communication and the idea of looking at it from an empathetic way really makes a huge difference.
And are these sort of tips that you just mentioned labeled sort of clearly in the book, so that someone who is really trying to maybe make themselves feel better in this world of just chaos can sort of help learn these ways of radical kindness?
Yeah, absolutely. And also, how do you deal with the negativity that's going on in the world, right? So yes, we all probably believe that we're kind, and I think that we are, and yet can we have this be more of a practice the way that we practice gratitude or mindfulness, or something where we want to chip away from that shield that we have, that armor that we have? And so yes, in the book there are 32 random acts of kindness that you can do right now. They're really, really easy. Everyone always talks about paying for the toll for the guy behind you, but it's so much more than that. It's also changing the voices that are inside your head, so that if you're not being kind to yourself, how do you expect that you're going to be kind to other people, right? And also giving the benefit of the doubt. If you're having a bad day, or somebody that you're dealing with is dealing with you in a negative way, how do you change that cycle and not necessarily be so negative back?
So how do you deal with someone then who you may not agree with? Because obviously that's something that's very much a day-to-day experience in just reading about today's news, the climate in the U.S., even the world in general. There's so many divided opinions on so many divided subjects that what people usually end up doing is just throwing insults at the other side rather than maybe taking the time to listen to what they have to say and then maybe going forward in a more less hostile approach. So how do you, if you don't agree with someone's views, how do you treat them with radical kindness, or how do you find the empathy to be able to agree to disagree, or maybe talk to them to sort of come to some kind of compromise?
Yeah, that's exactly that. That's such a good question. I love that conversation because it is a practice. It is a level that we go to, and that's the point, right? Is that when we're dealing with somebody that we don't agree with, how do we then prime ourselves to actually listen and learn? And I think what we need to see is that the loudest person in the room isn't necessarily the one who's going to make that change. It really is about coming together to find and celebrate the differences as well as the similarities and learning from every situation that we're in. And I talk about looking at the world through the eyes of a child, right? That sense of curiosity and exploration and excitement and passion when you're up against something new, right? And yet as adults, sometimes when we're up against something new, we have this defense mechanism, or we see it from the news in the sense of, throwing threats or bullying being something that you get your way because of that. And that's what we have to change, right? It's more about collaboration and working together and learning, and then being able to respectfully debate your point of view and have the facts to do that, right? And also be able to say, I might not know. This is how I feel, but I might not know, and maybe I need to look a little bit further into this issue.
So you're the co-creator of a lot of children's shows. Obviously, this book is maybe a little more geared to adults. What do you think is the point where, as children, we maybe lose, as we grow up, we maybe lose that kindness that we grew up with or innately have, that makes us need to read a book like Radical Kindness to sort of get back that sense of human nature that we may have lost just by growing up in today's world.
Totally. And I always believe that adults are just big preschoolers, right? Because sometimes we just want to throw ourselves on the ground and have a complete meltdown, and sometimes we do.
Right.
But we always have a parent or a guardian or a teacher or a mentor that is an adult that is with you when you're going through that process, sometimes hand-holding you, hopefully in a loving way, a scaffolding way, a way that helps you learn. And that when you become an adult, you're just kind of, you're left there to your own devices in the world, and you start to create this armor. You start to create some of the real life scenarios that start to change the way you look at the world. And I think that we need to get back to those basics. And how do you do that? Through some of the practices that we need to do to literally focus on ourselves first, so that we can become kinder to ourselves, be more loving, be more empathetic, and then we turn around and we do it for others. But we do lose it as we get older because of this lack of connection, this lack of neighborhood that's happening now, this lack of bonding, this ability to hide behind a screen and just throw whatever you think out there, where back in the day, you might have those thoughts, but you might not say them,
right.
But as soon as you have a thought, you are throwing it out in the world. And
right.
Maybe it takes some, one of the things we talk about is pausing before you say yes to something, but pausing before you say no to something, and pausing before you, either, compliment something or throw a negative insult at something, right? It's this constantly just being more thoughtful about how we're treating ourselves and how we're treating others.
How do you think people can be more thoughtful when we're so taught now to respond to every notification and, just act instead of to just maybe pause and put the phone down? Because that's such that's what our culture is now.
Right.
We have to respond immediately. So how difficult do you think it'll be for people, especially, when we're talking about hiding behind a screen? Generation Z is about the biggest group of people that are going to have just completely grown up with a smartphone in their hand. How do you, are you afraid of, what they might be like when they grow up? Like, do you think they will have radical kindness in them to, after having been so long being protected by a screen and not maybe putting the phone down as much as they should?
Well, that is what I worry about, and I think the only way for me to combat that is to do something about it, right? Whether in some sort of media, whether it's putting it out in a book, putting it out on a television show, trying to understand how we get older. But I think the idea of fear of missing out, the idea of not knowing your own self-worth, and so therefore you have to immediately respond to something or be part of that conversation, even if you haven't had the research that you need to do to have an opinion on that situation, right? So that anxiety, that level of stress that our kids have, Gen Z has, and how do we literally take that back? And it is owning our own power. It's knowing that if we're late to the party starts when we get there, right? It's like having that sense that, you know, when I have something that is truly worthy of saying, everyone will listen, and that's a really powerful thing. And I think we just need to realize that. And I look at it with my own teenagers, right? That sense of wanting to be part of the Instagram culture, wanting to be out there, wanting to have. But is it perfect? Is it real? Is it, you know, all of those things, we have those constantly conversations, and the only way, again, to combat that is to have one-on-one true relationships that are not just texting relationships, that are not just, you know, behind the screen, that we really truly we really truly have these conversations and give ourselves that moment to be in the moment.
Great. Well, one last question while I still have you. You know, we do know that there's this Fred Rogers biopic coming out. What do you think of Tom Hanks as Fred, since, you know, he's your mentor and friend?
I don't know. It'll be interesting, right? It's going to be an interesting thing to see. It's not just putting on the red sweater, but of course, who else but Tom Hanks to play somebody, you know, so beloved than someone we love, like Tom Hanks.
Sure. Tom Hanks has played a lot of roles, and definitely excited to see him in this one. So where can viewers get Radical Kindness?
Everywhere that books are sold, Radical Kindness, and also angelasclues.com through my website. There's all information about where I'm speaking about it, where I'm signing books, all that stuff.
All right, well, that's Angela Santomero, who wrote Radical Kindness. She's also the co-creator of Blue's Clues and Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood. And we're going to go to a commercial break now, but you've been watching Digital Trends Live.